about that time, right about now.
Right about now. Funk soul brother.
Well, hey, everybody. Welcome to the Right About Now podcast. My name is John Small, and I will be your guide and host for the next hour or so. If this is the first episode of Right About Now you have ever listened to, man, you are in for a treat. And if you're a regular listener, then consider this a little icing on the cake. Man, that is a cliche. I like to avoid cliches. Cliches are not good for writing. What's another way to say icing on the cake? I don't know. Leave me a comment below. I need a better way to say icing on the cake. Anyway, you get my point. This is a special episode. We have a legend in the house. Elizabeth George is here, the renowned and prolific crime novelist. Elizabeth is best known for her Linley mystery series, which you may have seen on television. It was adapted into a PBS and BBC show, and you can now see it on Amazon Prime and all over your streaming networks. And since the 1980s, she has written 21 books focusing on the British aristocratic Inspector Linley and his rough around the edges partner detective Sergeant Havers. And now, the latest installment of that series just dropped, and it's called Something to Hide. And Elizabeth has such an interesting story. Before becoming a novelist, she was a public school teacher in Orange County. And perhaps true to her roots, she loves to share her knowledge about the craft of writing. She's even written 2 books on writing, which I found out about while I was researching for this interview, and I downloaded them on my Kindle and have completely devoured them. I think they're so interesting. One is called Write Again, and the other is called Mastering the Process. And basically both dissect her writing process. And it's very methodical and very precise, somewhat like the way Linley and Havers solve crimes. So we spent a lot of time on this episode talking about process, specifically about character development, because that is where she starts on every novel. And you won't believe how in-depth she gets on her character development. We also talk a lot about setting, because that is also extremely important to her. And you sort of realize it in all her books, how detailed she is about the setting. And then, of course, we just talk about her own life and her own experience. I mean, why and how does an American living in Washington State write about culture and places and circumstances that are halfway across the world? I had a lot of questions for her. I kept her on that Zoom for a long time. So sit back, grab a stiff gin and tonic, and enjoy this interview. Elizabeth George, welcome to the Right About Now podcast.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
I am so thrilled to have you on the show. You're a writing legend, and you've been doing this so well for so long, and have really created wonderful books and characters. So I'm excited to find out all about you and how and your origin story and how you became who you are as a writer. And if we could just time travel a little bit, I know that you grew up in the Bay Area and you lived in Orange County for a while. I'm in Los Angeles here, so just south of where I am. And you taught, right? You taught in public schools.
That's right.
How did you transition into a career going from being a teacher to being a novelist?
You know, I have always written from the time I was very young, from the time I first learned to write. And that grew out of my love of reading. My brother and I used to be taken to the library maybe once a week, maybe twice a month. I can't really remember, but we went to the library a lot, and I would get a stack of books suitable for my age, which would probably be about 7. And then as soon as I learned to read, basically we started going to the library. And what happened is that as I read these books, and I have always been a voracious reader. I love reading. And as I read these little children's books, I thought, oh, wow, this would be fun. And so I began creating my own little stories. And so that's how I started out. I I had a lot of support from my parents during all the time that I was writing. And
That's
I think
great.
largely because they always knew exactly where I was, and they didn't have to worry about me. I wasn't going out getting into drugs because I was in my bedroom writing. And so
Right.
they helped me. They gave me, I started out on my mother's 1929 typewriter that had been through a flood in Ohio, but it still worked.
Oh,
So
wow.
that's what was my first instrument. I still have that typewriter. Now it's sort of like a museum piece. But they gave me a decent typewriter when I got, graduated, as it were, from 8th grade. And then they gave me an electric typewriter when I was ready to go to college. So then, of course, in those days, that was state-of-the-art equipment, electric typewriters. Oh my God, that was really a big deal.
Yeah.
Things have changed radically since
Do you
then.
still type on a typewriter, or have you moved on to
No. I basically I use a desktop computer that I use as a souped up typewriter, because I don't do anything else on that particular computer except my novels. When I'm traveling, I'll take a small computer with me that I might also do email on, but generally all my writing is done on this souped up computer / typewriter. And that has served me very well. Anyway, so that's
So you always knew from the very young age that you wanted to be a
Yeah.
writer, and it's great that you had the encouragement of your parents. They were not writers, right? Or were they in the arts?
No, but my dad was a huge reader. He used to read to us. My mom was, she's a registered nurse, although she left the workforce for a while when she had me and my brother, and so she served as our primary caretaker, like a housewife. I don't like that term, but anyway, that's pretty much what she did until I was 13 and my brother was 14. And then she went back to work and then continued working into her 70s. I had that background from my dad and really loving to read, and so that was what I did myself, but I never really thought that I would do it professionally.
Mm-hmm.
And I just did it when I had free time, mostly in the summers when I was a teacher.
Right. That's a nice thing about being a teacher. You have those breaks, those long breaks.
Yeah, you have that extended period of time. Yeah, and I didn't have to work during the summer. My husband was also a teacher, and then he became an administrator, but we always used to put away money so that neither of us would have to get some kind of supplementary job in the summer. So we always were able to just have our summers free.
So did you follow the traditional path of having written, you wrote a novel and then kind of shopped it around? Is that kind of how you broke into?
Yeah. Well, yeah, in the sense that once I wrote a novel in 1983, I didn't decide to try to get a publisher. What happened was really unusual. I was very depressed at the end of the novel, and I wasn't quite sure why I was depressed, except that I was depressed. And I told my husband about that, that I was depressed, and he said, "Oh, well, why don't you try to get it published?" And then it never occurred to me to try to get it published. I'd never tried to get anything published before, although I had written a lot of short stories. I'd written really bad poetry, but I had not ever tried to get anything published. So I thought, oh, okay, why not? And so that began my journey toward publication. I knew no one, and that was actually pretty helpful to realize that, and ultimately realize that it really is dependent upon your writing getting published. It's not dependent on who you know. So I sent that first book out, and it was, soundly rejected for very good reasons. But I did get an encouraging letter from an editor at Charles Scribner's called Suzanne Kirk, and she gave me some time immemorial advice. She said, you're a good writer, but crime novels aren't written this way anymore. And so my suggestion is that if you do want to do this, that you read some crime novels first. And I thought, oh, that's not a bad idea.
Well, that surprised me because you are a big reader. So you hadn't been reading a lot of crime novels.
No, I hadn't. I mean, I read Agatha Christie. When I did read crime, it was from the golden age of mystery. And so in the golden age of mystery, there was a sort of a way the crimes came to be solved. And invariably, at the end of the book, the sleuth would take everybody into the library, explain the crime, and reveal who the killer was. So I thought, oh, okay, that shouldn't be a problem. And so that's what I did in my very first book. The the sleuth, and that was Simon St. James, he takes everybody into the library. So I decided to take her advice and to read a few of these books, and I realized, oops.
Yeah, it's been updated a bit.
That's not what happens. And so so that was a great learning experience for me. And I'm so blessed that Suzanne Kirk was actually willing to take the time to write that letter to me, because not only did it give me more confidence about my writing, but it also gave me an important piece of advice about the structure of these kind of novels in the first place.
You eventually create these two memorable characters, Inspector Lindley and Detective Sergeant Havers, and they are in England. They're based in England. One is a kind of aristocratic, well-schooled. The other is, they're sort of opposites in that way. Mm-hmm. I'm curious, and then who knew that this, you probably didn't know when you created these characters that this would be your legacy for so many years afterwards. I mean, you've written other types of books, and you've written young adult books as well, and books about writing, but those two characters have really carried for so long. I'm wondering, why you chose to set a book. You live in Seattle, or you live in the Washington state. Why you chose to set a book in England and with English characters and English ideas? Tell me about that a little bit.
The reason that I set my books in England, well, there are really two reasons. The first is that I have had a long time love affair with England. I think a lot of Americans do. And I first went to England during the period that was called Swinging London, and this was the 60s. Mm-hmm. And at this period of time, they had not even changed their money system yet. So if you were going to travel there, you really had to learn pounds, pence, shillings, etc. And I found that really fascinating. Yeah. I thought, this is just so cool. And I didn't realize that, of course, having the system that they had, one was always walking around with at least 5 pounds of coins. I don't mean 5 pounds as in British pounds. I mean like 5 pounds.
Like weighing your pockets down pounds.
Oh my God, yeah. But it was so fun mastering that system. And so when I decided to actually try to write crime novels, it never really occurred to me to set them any other place, because I thought it would be so much fun, to write about England. And as far as the characters go, if you're going to write a crime novel in England, well, you don't have too much choice. I suppose you could write about a private sleuth or something who comes from America and deals with England. But I really wanted to explore as much of England as I could during my lifetime. So seems sensible then to make these characters British characters.
And why crime novels? People are so drawn to crime novels. It's probably one of the most popular genres, both in literature and also in the movies and television. First question, what was it about crime that drew you? And then I'm curious what you think it lends itself so well to the arts, to fiction particularly.
Why did I choose crime? Yeah. Well, there's several reasons. First of all, I was assigned to teach a class at El Toro High School where I was a teacher. I was assigned to teach a class called The Mystery Story. And in order to teach this class, I had to deconstruct mystery stories or crime novels. To begin that deconstruction, I used Dorothy L. Sayers' History of the Mystery Story. And it's a very thorough examination of crime novels, crime stories. So as I taught that course then, with this background from Dorothy L. Sayers, I began to think, you know what? I think I could write one of these. And I thought I could, because here I was, every summer that rolled around, I knew I was supposed to be writing, but I really didn't have any outlet for that feeling that I should be writing. But I began to see in the crime novel that it would provide me with something that most other novels don't, other styles of novels don't provide the writer, and that is with an automatic through line. If I'm writing a crime novel, that means a crime occurs, and by the end of the novel, the crime needs to be solved in one way or another. Maybe the killer comes to legal justice or physical justice or psychological justice, but the killer does come to justice, and it can't be something that the reader is left in the dark about. So I really, really liked that. It sort of was like a skeleton, and on that skeleton, I could hang as much as I wanted. I could hang in development of character, exploration of theme, revelation of social issues. I could do all of these things with a crime novel. So that is largely why I set upon writing crime novels. I had not read a lot of crime novels. I'd read virtually none except Agatha Christie and the Golden Age of Mystery, those writers from that period of time.
Right.
So I had to kind of learn what a modern crime novel should look like, as well as learn how I was going to go about it. Can you repeat what your second question was?
The second question was, why do you think in general crime novels are so popular in the arts? Not only why do so many writers get into it, but why do so many people want to read these books?
One of the reasons I think is that, depending upon the author, crime novels are intelligent books, intelligently written. They can be dumb books, badly written, but for the most part, they aren't. For the most part, the people that are publishing crime novels are people who are publishing books that are really well written. But at the same time as being an entertainment, an escape from everyday life, they also offer the readers the ability to accept the challenge of the book, which is to think about who committed the crime, and to see if you can get to the solution before the detectives can get to the solution. So it offers that as well. And I just think that, it's fascinating. I think as far as film goes and television, I mean, it's just amazing how many police shows and detective shows are on television.
It seems like there's an
now.
insatiable appetite, either that or medical dramas, right?
Yeah, and you know what? It's sort of the same thing. It's like a through line exists.
Yeah.
If you're doing a crime television show, well, there's a crime. And what's really cool about crime shows now is that it's not just a once a week and bingo, the crime is solved. Especially these wonderful British shows, the crime might take up a whole season, and you're learning stuff about all of these characters at the same time as the crime is being explored by the detectives. And in these British shows, they just don't have any weak links as far as the acting is concerned. They pull in people that you would swear they just got off of the street in Manchester. And I think that is a part of their enduring appeal, is everything about them is so realistic.
Now, I have had the pleasure of reading. You wrote 2 books about writing, and I've been reading them, and they're so good. One is called Right Away, and it's really about your process and how you think about the novel. And the other one is called Mastering the Process, which is it's the same idea, but you actually dissect one of your books and you show, this is exactly how I did it for this book. So you really understand step by step how you put together a book. And it's really, really interesting. And not a lot of writers don't, really open up the curtain like that. So it's so cool to have that experience. And one of the things that really intrigued me is how character plays such a huge role in your novels, in terms of that's where you start. You start with your characters, right?
Yeah.
And talk to me a little bit about that. Is that how you started with the Inspector Lindley Havers series, with those 2 characters, or one of those characters?
Yeah, that is how I began the series. It was first of all identifying who was going to be the characters in this. If I'm going to write a British crime series, who are these guys? Who are the people? And that, so I did create those characters first in advance of knowing what the crime was. I don't do that in that way anymore. Obviously, those guys are already created. So now what I do is I begin with the location and the crime set within that location. Yeah. And so until I know, the killer, the victim, and the motive, I really can't go any farther than having researched the location. Once I have those things set in concrete, then I can do what I normally do in creation of one of these novels, and that is to people the world of the crime and the investigation. And that is just this generic list of characters who might be involved in this crime. They might have been affected by it. It might have happened to a relative of theirs. They might be the perpetrator of it. And so I create those characters. And in the creation of those characters, I begin to learn other pieces of information about the crime, and I begin to learn what the theme is, because the characters are going to exist not only as part of the crime novel, but they're also going to exist as a reflection of the theme of the book as well.
Yeah, I mean, you really let the characters tell you what, and the setting tell you how this story is going to play out, right? They're your muses in that sense. If we can time travel for a minute, it's been a while since you developed the characters or even created the characters of Lindley and Havers, but I am curious, when you first started them, the decision process in coming up with those characters. We talked about why England and why crime, but why those two people? And I know they've changed a lot over the years, but in the initial stages when you created them, what was the idea there?
Initially, my main character was not going to be Lindley. It was going to be the forensic scientist Simon St. James. And what I thought was that I was going to do this series where Simon St. James would be the one that solved the cases. And then when I was setting it up, I thought, well, gosh, if he's going to be the person who solves these cases, he needs somebody in the cases to be solved through his expertise in forensics. And so that became the character of Thomas Lindley. Obviously, he had to be a professional. So I created Thomas Lindley to be a character that I really wanted to write about. I think that's so crucial, is that you got to want to write about.
Be interested in that
characters.
person. Yeah.
Yeah, you really do. And so I decided that I wanted to give him some of the things that make England, England. And I started out with a title. That I love the fact that in England, people can have first and last names, but they can also be known as by their title, like, George Gordon, Lord Byron. Well, he's Byron. Nobody ever talks about Mr. Gordon or George Gordon. They talk about Byron. And I love that idea. So I thought, okay, let me give this guy a title. And I decided his name would be Thomas Lindley, Lord Asherton. And then I had to figure out, well, okay, so if you're going to be Lord Asherton, exactly what are you? And so, I mean, there are various things that you could be to be called Lord somebody. And so I went with an earl. So he became the Earl of Asherton. And then I just began to create the world from which he came.
Was he based on any real person?
No. His physical appearance was, because for years I couldn't write about him because I didn't know what he looked like. And then in the deep dark past, I saw the film Chariots of Fire, and there's a scene where the actor Nigel Havers is, he's going to the Olympics and he's a hurdler, and so he practices on his estate. He runs the hurdles, and his butler has put full champagne glasses on each of the hurdles, knowing that, he would definitely not want to do anything to upset the champagne glasses by hitting the hurdle. And when I saw that, I thought, oh, how cool. That's a great idea, in that guy is the person I want to sort of be Thomas Lindley. So now I call Thomas Lindley Nigel Havers with improvements, because ultimately I didn't want him to look exactly like Nigel Havers. I wanted him to look a little bit different from that, and certainly be bigger than Nigel Havers. So I, created him slightly differently, but as an earl with the family pile out in Cornwall, and with all what I call the accoutrements of earldom.
Yeah.
When I created Barbara Havers, I created her to be his polar opposite.
Right.
So if you just look at Lindley, everything he is, she is the opposite of. He's tall, she's short. He's in really good physical condition. She is not. He's from the aristocratic class, the upper class. She is from the working class, and so they, in the initial book, it would be like they would be frequently at loggerheads. Additionally, in the initial book where she appears, she hates him. She has totally the wrong idea of what kind of person he is, and she's assigned to work with him. And their superior officer, when he makes this assignment, says to her, "There's a lot you might learn from working with Lindley." And ultimately she does. And through time, they have become, closer and closer as friendship. And ultimately, where I wanted to take them was to a man and woman who really love each other, but in no way would this love ever be sexual. So that was what I was trying to do.
We know that will never. Well, we don't never know. Nothing's for sure.
No, I mean, the people who've read the books know that the idea of Lindley and Havers ever getting together is ludicrous.
Right.
Now, the people who've only seen the films, they think it's possible because of the way they filmed it.
Right.
They wanted to, give the idea that, something could happen between these two people. But, in reality, if you read the books, you'll know that that whole idea of them doing anything sexual is
right about now is sponsored by AG1 by Athletic Greens. I drink AG1 twice a day, once in the morning and once at night, and I have to say it has really become a part of my daily routine. I love knowing that I'm giving my body all the healthy vitamins and nutrients it needs every day, so I'm not stress eating or I'm not taking fistful of vitamins that cost an astronomical amount at whole paycheck. And I love that it's an all-in-one drink, and it tastes really good too. I mix it in coconut water. My daughter puts it in just plain water. Unfortunately, she drinks so much of it that I run out too frequently. If you use my special code, you will get a free 1-year supply of vitamin D3K2 and 5 free AG1 Travel Packs with your first purchase. You go to drinkag1.com/writeaboutnow, WRITE. That's drinkag1.com/writeaboutnow. Check it out. In terms of giving Lindley a partner, because I know it started with Lindley, I feel like a lot of crime novels are either kind of the lone wolf crime solver, or then you have this sort of, I guess the prototype would be the Sherlock Holmes and Watson, the kind of the duo, solving. Did you always know that you wanted to do a duo?
No, I didn't. What happened is that Barbara Havers was created for my third book. In the first, there was no Barbara Havers at all in my first 2 books. But in those 2 books, the crimes were solved by St. James. And then when I made this decision that I call, hey, let's see if this guy, Thomas Lindley, who's a detective, can actually solve a crime. And once I made that decision, then I decided he needs a partner so that he can toss around ideas with a partner, and through those ideas really confuse the reader. So then I created Barbara Havers to be that partner. Yeah. And the whole creation of her, really was quite deliberate. But I realized that I couldn't keep them as these antagonists through a series. It would be really, really boring. So I needed them through the series to grow closer and to really have each other's back. And so that's where they are today.
The fact that you said all these in England, was it intimidate you early on to get the language right, to get the way that people speak right, and the kind of cultural part of it, because you don't live in England, you're not English. Mm-hmm. And I know that a lot of English writers have written about Americans, so it's not unprecedented. Certainly a lot of Americans have written about English people. That would be, to me, I feel like as a new writer, and even as a veteran writer, like always a bit intimidating that, I'm going to get it wrong, especially because we know that English people, this is a stereotype, can be a little snobby. You want to get it right, Yeah.
I got to say that when I was first beginning, it didn't occur to me to be intimidated.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, really. It just didn't even occur to me that this might be a problem. The one thing I knew from writing my very, very first novel, though, this was a book that would only be published over my dead body, and that's only if they could find it. But my first attempt at a British novel, I had not gone I'd been in the location where I wanted to set the book, which was in Yorkshire, near the town of Richmond in Yorkshire. And so that was sort of where I wanted to set the book, only I had not been back there for quite some time. And so this is going to really date me. My husband and I used to take photographs. We used to take slides.
What are those?
Remember slides? Yeah. And so what I was doing to refresh my memory was taking these slides, and which were like 1 inch by 1 inch or 1.5 inches. It was little squares, and I was holding them up to the light just to try to remember what the atmosphere was like or what the location looked like. And having done that for that book, I realized, I can't be doing this. I need to go over to England to the location where I want to set my book if I'm going to actually write about this country. So with the second book, which was A Suitable Vengeance, which I rewrote as my fourth book, but for that book, A Suitable Vengeance, I actually went to Cornwall deliberately to do the locations and to wander around in the locations and get a real sense for what the place was like.
You really do that. You really do your research. Like you take pictures. You're like a private investigator. Yeah.
Yeah. My editor in England used to call me a topographical gumshoe because I was always going to these different locations to really get a feeling for them. I love novels that have a strong sense of place to them. And I wanted to give a strong sense of place in my books as well.
How about dialogue? How are you able to get to hit the dialogue so on the nose?
I think that it helps that I've read many British novels, and I really think it helps that there are so many British television shows, and especially these police shows, which have people at all different levels of society, and are very contemporary. So it's a combination of all of those things. It's a combination of watching a lot of British television, reading a lot of British novels, and also going over to England and reading the newspapers and talking to people and watching English television in England. One of my favorite sources is watching this crazy British talk show that I don't want to go into it, but the people that are on this show, it's sort of like I don't know, Sally, Jesse, Raphael show, one of those. And it's where they, people tell their innermost secrets. And this show is classic because it's where the people have come out of central casting, with the people they find to go on this show. And some people have been on it more than once. They go on the show and they tell their most intimate secrets, and they do DNA tests. They do all kinds of stuff. And so that really gives me an opportunity to really listen, to hear what these people sound like. And then what I try to do is I try to give the flavor of whatever dialect they're speaking. I try to give the flavor of that rather than to write the entire thing in their dialect.
Now you're well known, but early on, did a lot of people think you're English? Do people still think you're English? I was also thinking your name is so English.
Yeah, people do. People do think I'm English. They still come up to me, and after I've given a speech somewhere, and people will still come up to me and say, "Oh my God, I thought you were English," which is a great.
It's a great compliment. Plus, your name. It's like, is that your name? Your given name?
Yeah, that is my name.
That's like, could there be a more English name than Elizabeth really? George? I was thinking like your middle name should be Victoria. Then you'd be the most English person, Elizabeth George. But anyway, I'm going to want to get into your latest novel. I'm so fascinated with the way you develop characters, because one of the things, I don't think people, understand just how in depth you go into your characters before you even start writing the story. And I thought that was really cool, and something that I had never thought about, and it's really been inspiring to me. You actually give these character prompts in your book to sort of help people develop their characters. I mean, you write almost like these full analyses of your characters, right? Pages and pages of who, all these things, their age. You start with their name, right? That's very important to you. It's one of the first things you come up with. One of the things I want to dive into is, you talk about these two things, their core needs and their pathological maneuver. And can you just talk to me real briefly about what you mean by that?
Yeah, well, first of all, I think that, the people generally are operating in order to fulfill whatever their core need is in life. And you're sort of, the core need really kind of rises out of your family of origin. People could argue that you're born with a core need, but I think it's more like you develop your core need based on the way you were brought up and what your family is like. So to give an example for me, my core need is to be competent and perfect, and that's obviously a really pretty difficult core need to have to try to fulfill. Competent, I can fulfill that one, but perfect, no, that's gonna be really tough. That's why I don't send my rough drafts to my editor. Obviously, I send what I think is the most perfect, if we have levels of perfection, the most perfect version of a book as I can possibly manage. Competence. Here's to give you an example of why my core need is competence. In my entire life, I have never had a naked in public dream.
Interesting.
But I have had incompetent in public dreams. And those are incredibly anxiety producing. Generally, incompetent in public dreams that generally has to do with my life as a teacher. As a matter of fact, I don't think I've ever had an incompetent in public dream that hasn't been about my teaching life. And it's usually like I've been assigned a class that I know nothing about. and
Right,
I've got
you
to
show
go
up.
there and,
Yeah.
that kind of thing. And I'm obviously not
Not
competent.
prepared. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Or I'm trying to get to school and I can't get, and I know that that class is going to start soon, and I'm trying desperately to get there, that kind of thing. Those things are what core needs are. And everybody has one, and but sometimes people don't know what their core need is. The pathological maneuver is the state or the behavior that the character turns to when the core need isn't being met. So, for example, if we look back at my core need of being competent, then my pathological maneuver is the obsession with not being competent.
It's like the opposite. Yeah.
Yes, it's the opposite. Because what I'm trying to do in being competent is appear a certain way, appear perfectly competent. And all that's going to come from my brain, because to be competent, I've got to really know what it is that I'm teaching or talking about, and a lot of that has to do with my brain. And so the pathological maneuver is also going to be in my brain. Somebody who has a core need of, let's say, to be constantly in motion, constantly active, they're really unhappy unless they can stay active. Well, their pathological maneuver certainly isn't going to be obsessive thought. If their core need has nothing to do with their brain, but has more to do with their body, their pathological maneuver will have to do with their body as well.
So
those are the things.
Yeah. So pathological maneuvers also they also kind of fall in the form of like addictions, right? And like delusion, being delusional.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely.
So you think it's really important for your characters to have this conflict. This is the human condition, but as far as you should know before you even write a character, these two things are among other things.
Yeah. I personally need to know that, because it's part of my process of creating a character and then seeing that character spring to life on the page. I'm not saying every writer has to do that, has to know those things. No, but I feel more comfortable with my creation of character if I do know those things.
Do you think that's probably part of your competent need, is to just feel like you need to know these characters inside and out before you...
Oh, definitely. Yeah. Let me give you an example of that. One time, I used to have a writing seminar that met in my house when I lived in Huntington Beach. And occasionally I would read stuff that I had written to my students in the seminar. And it was so funny, because one night I read a prologue to a book. And as I was reading it, I knew it wasn't good. And when I finished, I put it down and I said to them, "This is not very good, is it? Why?" And one of them said, "Because your point of view character is one-dimensional." It was very successful teaching on my part that she even knew that. and I said, "Oh my God, you're right." And the reason she was one-dimensional is that I broke my own rule. And I figured, this is her only scene in the book. I don't need to create her in advance. Well, that's what happened as a result, is that she had absolutely no depth to her at all. And so I didn't create her then with depth so she could do that, be that point of view character in the prologue. I just switched the point of view to a real significant character who was also in the scene with her. And when I did that, it was fine.
Which of your characters is most like you in the books? Are they all parts of you?
Yeah, the continuing characters, they're really all parts of me. St. James probably is the closest to me mentally, in that, he spends most of his time in his head and does not emote easily, if at all. And that is very much what I'm like. I used to say that all the emotion was beaten out of me when I was a child. That's not really true. I wasn't beaten, but I did grow up in a situation where we had to really have good control over our emotions. So that's sort of what St. James is like. It's very cerebral, and Deborah, his wife, is the exact opposite of that, and that puts them into conflict a great deal.
All right, let's talk about Something to Hide. It's a great book, and you talk about a community, a part of England that a lot of people might not be familiar with. I'm curious, and that is the Nigerian community, and specifically a female genital mutilation, which is a very touchy subject and very deep, very intense topic. to cover. And I'm wondering, how you came up with this idea. Let's start there. Where did this thought come in your mind that you want to cover this topic?
Sure. It was sort of one of these unusual and serendipitous kinds of things. I was in a conversation with my goddaughter's aunt, who is an international lawyer. And at that period of time, she was working in a group that included British police and actually Gloria Steinem. And part of it, and what it had to do with was putting the whole cutting business out of business. And because in there's certain areas of the world, and certainly this happens in London, where women are either being cut or they are undergoing cut, modified cut, or they want to reduce the size of their genitals or whatever. And so that is part of what's going on in England. Female genital mutilation is really culturally derives from certain cultures who practice it. England is not one of those cultures that practices FGM, but within England, there are subcultures that do practice it. And there is a team at New Scotland Yard, who've been working on this and other forms of female abuse for years. And so they really were able to give me a lot of information about it. But it all began with that conversation that I had with my goddaughter's aunt.
And you say they were able to give you a lot of information. So do you have like a contact at Scotland Yard that you call and interview when you're preparing a story like this?
I don't have one contact at Scotland Yard. So what I do when I need to find a policeman who is willing to talk to me from the Metropolitan Police or from the countryside as well, I ask my editor's assistant, my British editor's assistant, to help me set something up. And she's really, really good at doing this. So what I did was I asked her if there was anybody in the Metropolitan Police who could talk to me about the pursuit of people who are mutilating young girls in the name of purity and chastity. And so she's the one who found this subgroup of officers in the Metropolitan Police who are investigating and attempting to put an end to FGM.
That is
so that's where I gained my initial amount of information. I went to Empress State Building where they are located and went up to the 17th floor and went up to the orbit. All of this stuff's actually in the book too, and talked to them, and they were very.
Do you find that people are very willing to talk to you generally, or people like?
Yeah, they are. It's wonderful. I have found over the years that people are absolutely willing to talk. I mean, when I look back on it, I have never not found somebody who was willing to talk. Do you know what I mean?
Yep.
I've never found somebody's who
like,
said, no.
I don't want to talk. Yeah.
Yeah, no, never have. And I've interviewed a lot of people from a lot of walks of life who have actually welcomed the opportunity to talk about what it is they do, what it is they believe, what their daily lives are like, how they go about their jobs, things like that.
That's so cool. I think of when people say write about what you know, they might get, I don't keep using this word intimidated, but keep using the word intimidated, to like write a crime novel because most people haven't been a detective, or maybe they don't know somebody who's a detective. But you have never had that sort of fear of just calling somebody up and telling me, tell me a little bit about how your career, is that how you learned about how crimes are solved?
There's a logic to how crimes are solved in that there's got to be a police investigation. So the police investigation, the dictates of a police investigation are that you're going to have the forensics team is going to be involved. You're going to, in a big crime, you're going to have the media also involved. The detectives are going to be doing interviewing. They're going to be gathering information. So there's a certain logic to it. And then what happens after that is trying to make contact with people who are going to tell you more. And I'm trying to think if I've had a book where I don't talk to the police. Early on, I didn't even know how to get in touch with the police. But after I wrote a book called For the Sake of Elena, which required me to get in touch with the Cambridge police and to find a detective willing to talk to me. From that point forward, I've always either gone personally to the police station or have written to them in advance asking if I can talk to a detective or a press officer, because the press officers are always really helpful too. And so from that point forward, I have made sure that I have somebody within the police that's willing to talk to me about how a particular crime is investigated or not, as the case would be.
So we talk about how you did your research on the police side of this story, something to hide. Talk about the Nigerian community. Did you have a few people in that community that you talked to get a sense of their culture, the way they speak, that kind of thing? How did you tap into that?
I certainly went to the part of London where the minority community is. I did not, however, interview anybody from that community. What I did instead was watch and read. There's a lot of stuff on YouTube about the Nigerian community, and I imagine there's a lot of stuff on YouTube about any community.
Yeah.
And there were also people within the, I'm smiling because I'm just thinking of some of the films that I watched, people within these communities, young people who make YouTube films and put them up, and all you have to do is say like Nigerian dialect. And you have like 15 people on there who've done a YouTube on the Nigerian dialect. It's just sort of amazing the way you can use the internet. I mean, I can remember even putting that into a search engine, writing, let's say, Yoruban dialect.
Yeah.
And pressing, or whatever you press, enter, and like have like all kinds of information. So I would say that I did most of the information on computer and watched interviews that had then been put onto YouTube, listened to TED Talks that had then been put onto YouTube, and I gathered my initial information that way. Then when the book was done, we had a Nigerian woman living in London who read the book to make sure that the details were correct. And she gave me some really good feedback.
Oh, that's
really
great.
Excellent feedback.
And is there like a sensitivity? I know like in this world today, you have to be very sensitive when you write about other cultures. You can be canceled or whatever if you might say the wrong thing. So was there a sensitivity about just getting it right and not offending anybody, that kind of thing?
Yeah, certainly my publishers were concerned about that. And that was one of the reasons why we had the sensitivity reader, but they don't call it that anymore. There's now another word for that. But that's why we had, and they suggested that we do that. And I said, absolutely, let's do it. But make sure it is a Nigerian woman living in London who does the reading. I didn't want, just some arbitrary person that they choose to do the reading. And this woman had done readings for them before, and so she did this again, and she really set me straight on stuff. I think that the important thing for any writer is not to presume better than a member of the community, what that community is like, and to make sure that there's somebody that you're able to communicate with in some fashion. The one thing that she pointed out to me that I really had to figure out, because she didn't say where it was or what it was. She said there are a number of microaggressions in the book. And so I had to, first of all, learn what a microaggression was.
What is that again? What's a micro? Well,
microaggression is like an inadvertent thing that a person says or does that they do not mean to be intrusive or insulting, but actually are intrusive and insulting to the person involved, to the recipient of that. So, a really common example that Black people give is when people want to touch their hair because it looks so soft. When you think about it, I mean, you wouldn't go up to a white person and say, "Oh, can I touch your hair? It looks so soft." You wouldn't do that. But that's something that they get subjected to.
So she pointed out some of these but she didn't say what they were. She just said they were there.
Yes. And I had to find them. And my British editor was really good about explaining the best way to deal with it. And he said the best way to deal with it is just like head on. And so then I had to figure out, well, what does he mean by head on? And my interpretation of that was that there had to be a character who was making these kinds of mistakes and was getting sort of smacked around metaphorically by the Black characters for having made those mistakes. And then that became Deborah St. James and her photography project that she's given, and the women who are also involved with this organization that is the sort of like the key to her photography project. So she goes into this organization not realizing that, first of all, she should never have taken this job. It should have gone to a Black photographer, but she did take it, and now she has to deal with the fact that there are people there who are really, really unhappy with her for having done that.
So you use this note of microaggressions and you just made it into a plot point in the story.
Yeah, and it was super important that it be addressed, actually.
Right.
I especially did not want the white people in the novel to come off as, the great white saviors. So I was really, really looking at ways to make sure that they were just part of a larger community, the white characters, and they had to come to understand what was going on with the Black characters in the book.
Last thought, the best advice that you give to writers starting out, or maybe sort of in a lull in their career or just getting motivated, is there something that you were told early in your career that helped you, or something that you tell? Because I'm sure you meet a lot of people who want to write.
Yeah, there were two things that really helped me early on in my career. One was a quotation that I took out of the Los Angeles Times, and it was just part of a larger article, and it said, "The people who get published are the people who don't give up." Mm. And so that is what I would say to people who might watch this. I would also say that P.D. James was somebody who gave me a really, really wonderful shot in the arm. I met P.D. James the very day that my second attempt at a British novel was rejected by a publisher. And so, but we were going to go see her that night. She was on book tour, so we did, and I got in the line to have my book signed. And so I asked her, how many times had she been rejected before she got published? And I'll never forget it. She began by saying, "Oh, my dear, things were very different then." And then I knew she was about to tell me that she'd never been rejected, which exactly was true. Right. P.D. James is one of the few writers who never was rejected. Anyway, but then she said, she reached across the table, she put her hand on mine, and she said, "You have done something that most people only dream of. You have written a novel. You must never give up." And I took that to heart, and then went on and wrote the third attempt at a British novel, and that was the one that got published.
Well, thank you, P.D. James. She passed the torch to you. That's wonderful. Elizabeth George, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us today. The book is called Something to Hide. I strongly recommend it, and all your books. And thank you so much.
Hey, you're welcome. Thanks for having me.
Awesome.
Bye.
Take care.
What do you mean?
Well, thank you so much for listening to the show. Hey, if you liked what you heard, please subscribe to Right About Now, where you can find all podcasts. You can also find me at Instagram at Right About Now Pod. I'm also on Facebook at Right About Now Podcast. Follow me on Twitter at Kid Finesse. And I've got a new newsletter. It's called Small Talk. You can find it on Substack. It is free of charge, and I give you bi-weekly tips on writing and stories to read and whatever is on my mind. Until we meet again, it's John Small encouraging you to do the right thing.